Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mailing It, the official podcast of the United States Postal Service. I'm Carla Kirby. This episode, we're going to talk about the Postal Service's 2023 stamp program, which features some exciting new designs celebrating American leaders and culture. Joining us once again on the show is Bill Gicker, Director for Stamp Services at the U.S. Postal Service. He's going to tell us all about the upcoming lineup and shed some light on the process behind their selection. Bill, welcome to Mailing It.
Thanks for having me.
When we had you on the podcast last December, we talked more broadly about the history of U.S. stamps and the way they're chosen. For our new listeners, would you mind telling us about your role as Director of Stamp Services?
Sure. I oversee Stamp Services. Stamp Services basically is responsible for everything from the initial ideas coming in from the public up through the design, clearance, production, and fulfillment of stamps.
Okay, now I understand from the previous podcast that stamp designs are chosen 3 years before they're released. That would mean the 2023 lineup was selected during the height of the pandemic. How did that affect the process?
Well, during the pandemic, we had to start remote meetings. Usually CSAC, the Citizen Stamp Advisory Committee, meets on a quarterly basis, and they do that in person. But during the pandemic, we had to switch to a Zoom version of those meetings, which was pretty challenging considering the meetings last a day and a half. But we managed, and we kept the process moving.
I can't imagine being in a day and a half meeting. But does the CSAC actually vote on all of the tens of thousands of submissions that come in from the public each year?
They review all of the subjects, yes. So when a submission comes in from the public, the first step is that my staff reviews that topic to ensure that it meets criteria. The criteria are all available on USPS.com, and to ensure that the stamp hasn't been done in the past 25 years. If it meets criteria and hasn't been done, then it goes before the committee for review.
So anyone from the public can submit an idea for a stamp request?
Anyone from the public.
And they would get that information from USPS.com?
Yes. All of the information on how to submit is on USPS.com. So
when we talk about the CSAC discussions, how does that play out? Do they get spirited sometimes?
They can, yes. We encourage debate. We want them to take the pro and the con of every topic, basically, and to really delve into it and discuss the positives, the negatives, whether it meets criteria for them to put on a stamp, and whether it has the merit to be on a stamp.
So when we talk about the CSAC, how many people sit on this team?
So the committee consists of a group of individuals that is hand-selected by the Postmaster General of the United States to basically review and sort of stand in for the American public. They come from all walks of life, all disciplines, and they evaluate everything that comes in.
So when we talk about getting an idea approved through CSAC, what percentage of members need to vote in favor of the topic for it to be passed?
50%. So it has to make at least 50% in order to be retained. The votes are anonymous. One of the artifacts of the pandemic and our meetings on Zoom is that we've started using electronic voting clickers, which has worked really well. And the committee really enjoyed using them during our Zoom meetings. So we are doing them now in person as well. And each year we issue about 25 to 30 stamp issuances out of the 30,000 suggestions that come in from the public.
Wow, that seems like a lot. So let's talk about the lineup for 2023. What are the things that we should be looking for?
Well, we've got a couple of great individuals. We are honoring Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. We are honoring John Lewis, Toni Morrison. That's just to name a few of the people. But then also some really interesting topics like railroad stations and waterfalls. So something for everyone.
So you mentioned a wide variety of stamps that are coming out in 2023. Can you elaborate on how you determine, your headliners?
Sure. So each year the committee tries to come up with as diverse a program as possible, and we approach diversity in many, many ways. So it's not it includes certainly racial diversity, but also gender diversity, but also diversity in interest areas. So that could include sports or literature or the arts or sciences. So for instance, this year we have women's soccer as a good example of a sports stamp. We have Toni Morrison and Tommy DePaula as examples of authors, Ernest Gaines as well. Also, items that you would find throughout the country, like waterfalls or train stations. So really, there's a lot of variety that is built into the program so that everyone feels like they have something to choose, even if they're not so interested in a particular area. So it's an important part of what the committee tries to do as far as striking a diverse program for everyone in the country.
So let's go back to the influential Americans. So you mentioned Toni Morrison and Ernest Gaines. So they both died in 2019. So this would have been their second year of eligibility versus Ginsburg, who died in 2020.
True. So right now, the current rule that we follow is that someone must be deceased for 3 years before being honored on a stamp. So as you said, Toni Morrison was eligible last year, but there's no guarantee that someone will be featured on a stamp at that time. With Ruth Bader and John Lewis, they actually won't be eligible until sometime in 2023. So they will not be issued until after the official 3 years of their passing.
So very much like Hall of Fame voting. You can be eligible, but that doesn't mean you're going to get in your first year.
That's right. And we really don't see timelines. If someone's worthy of being on a stamp, then they will be on a stamp. It's not tied specifically to an anniversary.
So when I'm thinking about Ginsburg and John Lewis, those are kind of first ballot Hall of Famers, right?
That's true, yes. The individuals on stamps really have to stand out. When you are receiving 30,000 suggestions a year, the people who are honored have to have national significance and really have made an impact on American culture.
And to be clear, all of these individuals were voted on in 2020.
Well, not necessarily. So a lot of this can happen it's a very fluid process. So though we say 3 years, that's what gives us the time to do the appropriate design and clearance. But we really keep working endlessly. So some of our topics are much older than that, and some are a little bit newer.
So you mentioned diversity as part of the selection process for the lineup each year. Does the revenue or the sales for a particular category of stamp come into play when you're looking at the different categories or the different stamps you want to release for upcoming years?
It does to a degree. We actually work closely with the committee, but really I take that on as my responsibility or the responsibility of my staff. We need to strike a balance. Not every stamp will be a huge seller, and that's okay. That we're here to honor the best of America, not based on whether they'll sell or be overly popular. But we must keep in mind that stamp revenue helps keep us functioning. So we do try to balance the program in that way as well. Stamps that we know will be popular and sell well with stamps that might not sell as well, but still have the merit to be on a stamp.
So during your tenure, what would you say are the top 2 selling stamps we've had?
That's hard to say. Charles Schultz and the peanut stamps always do well. We have never had a stamp issued with them that didn't sell well. People tend to not do quite as well, but the more popular someone is, the better they sell. So the more well-known they are, of course, and the more people who recognize their faces, the better they sell.
Are there any other series of stamps that are doing well or have done well in the past?
Generally speaking, our Black Heritage series does extremely well. It's very popular. It's anticipated. People wait for it to come out. So it's still a very strong performer, even after all these years. Lunar New Year is also very popular. So it's something that we will continue to do. It certainly has a place in our program.
So last time you were here, We also talked about some of the new printing technologies that give stamps a 3D texture or have an interactive element to them. Are there any stamps like that coming out this year?
There are a few, yes. We try to incorporate printing technologies to keep stamps interesting and fresh. So this year, with our Lunar New Year series, we'll continue using a reflective foil. This year, it's a turquoise color. There will also be a holographic foil on our $10 stamp. And with our Thinking of You stamps this year, there's a pane of 20 stamps and then stickers that you can peel off to customize what message you actually want to send when you are sending your message.
Wow, that's definitely interesting. But let's talk a little bit about this $10 denomination. That sounds a little unusual.
Most of our stamps are forever stamps. They're for the first class, first ounce letter rate. But there are other needs out there. So we do have other denominations. Some of them have gone to a non-denominated format. So postcard stamps say postcard now so that they don't expire. But there is still a need for some denominated stamps. We have $1, $2, $5, $10. We have a new 40-cent stamp coming out.
What would somebody use that for?
Well, for a $10 stamp, it would have to be something that's much heavier. So probably a package or a box, just depending. If they are not using Priority Mail or Priority Mail Express, those stamps have their own specific stamps for a flat rate envelope. But if it's a box or a different size or shape, then they could need the 10 or the 5 or the 2, depending on what they're trying to mail and what the price comes to.
So are there other denominations that exist for like Priority Express?
Well, what we have is stamps that are not for the first class, first ounce. So postcard stamps, say postcard. We have an additional ounce stamp. So if your letter is a little bit heavier, if you've put a couple gift cards in there or something, it may go above the first ounce. So we have an additional ounce stamp. This year, we're putting a stamp out with a school bus on it. Over the years, we've received a lot of requests from school bus drivers or to honor school bus drivers because of the important work they do every day with the nation's children. The postcard stamps this year have sailboats on them. They're just a nice, whimsical image. That when we say postcard, often we think of the day at the beach. But what we find is that dentist offices, schools, a lot of businesses who have to remind people of appointments will use our postcards. So we try to give them something nice for that purpose.
When we look at the stamp lineup, do we automatically say that those approved topics go on a forever stamp or a first class stamp? Or is there a distinction between what would go on this I'll call it off denomination stamp? Is that the same process?
It's essentially the same process, but we make those determinations both with the committee, but also internally. So the more generic topics are the ones that end up on those types of stamps because they're broad, general mail use stamps. The commemorative program really is where people are honored, events are honored, important historical milestones. That's the commemorative program, and they are forever stamps, first class, first ounce stamps.
So I read somewhere that we also have a Great Smoky Mountain denomination.
Well, that's coming out as part of our Priority Mail stamps. So Priority and Priority Express, we've been doing a series for the last several years, and they're locations people can go and see, and that includes the Great Smoky Mountains.
Are there any other national park stamps that were issued?
Not this year, but over the past several years, yes, definitely.
So it's my understanding, I did a little bit of reading, little research, that we have some stamps that are honoring our national parks. Can you talk a little bit about those and whether those are first class or other denominations?
Our national park stamps tend to be first class forever stamps. They're part of our commemorative programs. Usually they're based on very beautiful large spaces. So we want to really pull that out with the stamps and show as much as we can. And that always in the commemorative program has larger stamp formats for us to choose from. Mail use stamps are always the smallest.
So when we talk about formats, so I've seen stamps that are different sizes, but when we look at like the Great Smoky Mountains or the Florida Everglades Priority Express stamps, what size is that stamp?
That size is called a semi-jumbo. And we can use a semi-jumbo, which is a larger size for those because they go on our flat rate envelopes. So there's just more space. That size stamp on a normal envelope would be too large.
Are there any stamps that are being issued this year that commemorate anniversaries?
So, yes. So in 2023, the Women's World Cup will be taking place, and we are issuing a women's soccer stamp. Roy Lichtenstein, the modern artist, is being honored on the anniversary of his 100th birth. And the endangered species pane coincides with the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act.
So when we talk about the 2023 lineup, when will these stamps be available, or when did they become available?
So they will be issued throughout the year. They usually tie to an anniversary or some other significant date related to the subject matter on the stamps. Some things like Black Heritage come out in time for Black History Month. Lunar New Year, of course, would come out before Lunar New Year celebrations begin, so people can use those stamps on their correspondence. Love will come out before Valentine's Day, so people have that option to use them for Valentine's Day. But of course, they're good all year round.
So you mentioned Black History Month. Can you talk a little bit more about that and some of the other series that the Postal Service is going to do or has done?
Sure. So Black Heritage as a series began in 1978 with the issuance of Harriet Tubman and has been going strong ever since. And this year we are adding Ernest Gaines to the lineup. So we're very happy with that. The family's very excited, and I think it'll be a great first day of issue. In addition to Black Heritage, we also, of course, have our Lunar New Year series, and this installment for this year is the Year of the Rabbit. Love is actually considered a series, and this year we have a set of stamps, one with a kitten, one with a puppy, each holding a heart. And other series that we have at the moment, but we don't have in this year, are the Music Icons series.
So once a stamp is issued, how long does it remain on sale?
Stamps, especially the commemorative stamps, are printed in quantities that are intended to last about a year to a year and a half. Some go faster than that, and some take a little bit longer, but a year and a half is the goal.
So for our listeners, where could they find a stamp that may no longer be in circulation? Is there a particular place that they can go to order stamps that may not necessarily be on sale anymore?
If they're no longer on sale with the Postal Service, then they have to go to the secondary market, so stamp dealers, eBay, places like that. So there is a place to get older stamps, but of course for current stamps, it's through all of our offices nationwide or at USPS.com.
So of the stamps, what's your favorite stamp from this year's lineup?
I would have to say that my favorite stamp this year is Life Magnified. It's an interesting take on everyday objects, their image through an electron microscope to really enhance what they are, and then color enhanced. So they're quite graphic and bold, and they offer a little bit of a surprise because what they are isn't what they look like on the stamps.
I know a couple of my favorite stamps from previous releases are the Eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
I got a couple pages of that. And then also the sports ball series that had the texture of each of the different, like the tennis ball, the football. Those were really nice. I like those. So are there any other stamps you would want people to take a look at this year?
Really, they should just take a look at the whole program. We have a couple of great ones with Toni Morrison, Chief Standing Bear, Tommy DePaulo. Our endangered species stamps are striking and beautiful. They are part of a collection of photographs that were done for something called the Photo Arc. So it's photographer Joel Satori is trying to photograph animals that are endangered to try to bring awareness, but also to make a photo record of animals that may go away, but we hope not.
This has been very informative. So for our listeners, again, where can we get the stamps?
The best place is USPS.com. That way you know that you are getting the full array of stamps, but you can also get them at your local post offices.
Does every post office get the entire lineup?
Not every stamp, no. They can order every stamp, but they do not automatically get every stamp.
Okay, so like you said, USPS.com is the way to ensure that you can get all the stamps. Well, Bill, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has, like I said, been very informative, and I definitely will be on the lookout for the 2023 lineup.
Thank you.
And now it's time for Did You Know? Our segment where we explore some of the lesser-known facts about the Postal Service. For example, did you know that the Postmaster General used to be part of the President's cabinet? The Postmaster General was first invited to join the cabinet in 1829, and the Post Office Department was officially elevated to an executive department in 1872. The department held that position for nearly 100 more years until the Postal Reorganization Act replaced it with the U.S. Postal Service, an independent establishment of the executive branch of the U.S. government. That era included some major milestones in the Postal Service history, including rural free delivery, domestic parcel post and the growth of mail order businesses, airmail, the shipment of gold from depositories in New York City and Philadelphia to the newly constructed Fort Knox in 1937, and the introduction of zip codes. And that wraps up this edition of Did You Know? So thanks again to Bill Gicker for joining us today. For more information on the history of stamps and the selection process, check out our episode, Stamps, an American Obsession, from December 21st, 2021. And that's all for this episode of Mailing It. Don't forget to subscribe to Mailing It wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss the next episode, and follow along on Instagram at U.S. Postal Service, Twitter at USPS, and on Facebook.